Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We have a special guest here today. He goes by the name of CODESTRAP. A lot of you guys may know him now because he's developing quite a name for himself in the Palantir community. I connected with him a couple of weeks ago after viewing his content, and once you take a look into his content, you start to recognize this person understands Palantir and really the technology behind Palantir at a fundamentally different level than a lot of people, given his intimate relationship with software development. So CODESTRAP, happy to have you on. Excited to dive into a lot of different topics today. First question I kind of wanted to start it off with is, you've been developing a name for yourself in the community. You don't strike me as someone who necessarily cares about fame and attention and a lot of subscribers and all this stuff. You seem like someone who genuinely wants to get their ideas out there because you have these ideas around something that you think has a lot of potential. So how do you feel in terms of the name you're developing in the Palantir community and overall how the Palantir community is growing in 2022?
Yeah, I'm like super passionate about the community. I actually think it's the future of investing. I think this like social investing phenomenon that sort of popped up is this leading indicator of something bigger that's sort of brewing, and it's neat because we can combine all these people like from different sets of backgrounds and experiences. And it's like, wow, you can actually get a professional Wall Street analyst on a Discord server talking to like a professional person in technology combined with a rocket scientist and a geophysicist and like people who are experts in marketing. And like, so you get this like amazing mix of people, and you can all validate the thesis, or invalidate it too, and find those like holes. So like, I love the community. It's a certain amount of trolling and stuff, but like, whatever. That's just life. But like, as far as me personally, yeah, I just want to bring one voice in that group related to the technology side, like to be able to, because that's just like being a financial analyst. It takes a long time to know, kind of disciplines. And so you can't be all of those things. And so I just want to be able to fulfill that one part. And it helps because a lot of people, this is probably one of the hardest companies to understand. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, because all the technology they're building doesn't really, they're way out ahead. It's all emerging. So you don't have something to draw from as a reference point typically. So you definitely need like people who can show the future value of what Palantir is building. I think so. For me, that's good, just to try and help people like crystallize what it is exactly that they're doing. So for me, that's why I'm out there doing it.
I think that's really important. And I think, you mentioned people like Sachin, obviously, who's this guy who's in private equity. He's already invested in SpaceX privately, has these crazy connections. Him coming from a very heavy financial background, being able to talk to someone as technical as you. I mean, those conversations don't happen, I think, this early into the life cycle of a public company. They went public. They've been public for about a year and a half now. So it's like, okay, a year and a half into it, the content that the community is producing through social that people are able to consume is nothing short of phenomenal in terms of the conversations we're able to have. And I think, to your point as well, the demystification of a company that has been pretty mystified over the past 17 years is something where it takes technical people to be able to resolve and financial people to be able to shed a little bit more light on it writ large. Really interesting stuff in terms of the people that are coming around. Do you feel like, so when you say future of investing, do you feel like communities will develop around particular stocks and not pump them, but rather try to add a ton of different perspectives if the company is not necessarily allowed to disclose all those things given the nature of certain companies?
I think we're already seeing communities erupt over particular stocks. I mean, Tesla is a good example, right? So like Tesla has a massive community and following, on YouTube, but also outside of YouTube, the Twitter sphere and everywhere else. So I think that there's a renewed interest in investing with like a generation of people that is a bit younger than typically would be concerned with it. Maybe the pandemic accelerated a little bit of that, but that was probably a trend that was already emerging. You look at like gamification of stocks through platforms like Robinhood, like there's clearly a market emerging that wasn't there before. So I think, and like I always say, like there are waves that come together to form these things. It's not just one big wave. It's like all these little waves that eventually like kind of converge and they push an industry forward, or they make new inroads and create new industries. And so,
right. Because I mean, then you're educating the masses around really what's going on. And I mean, if you're in those, like the people who got in Tesla, I think 2017, 2018, that were really understanding what Wright's law was and what this was going to become. Obviously, I mean, I don't think anyone expected the stock to go berserk during COVID, and there were a lot of variables there, but those people knew something that other people just didn't know. And as a result of that, there was huge financial upside. So let's get into Palantir. Why do you think Palantir can change the world? And what makes you excited about this company?
Well, what's perfect about Palantir, like, so there's a future that's emerging. And in that future, AI is everywhere. And we start to see it a little bit today. Like it's in your microwave, it's on your stove, it's on your phone. But this is just the precursor. These are like the kind of the dumb models. The future edge AI that's coming will actually be able to make changes in the real world. So like right now, all the AI does is typically make a recommendation to a human, you know. But in the future, edge AI will act autonomously, right? So like whether that's changing the direction of wind blades on a turbine or changing the production of an oil rig or, you know, letting you know when your food is done, right? Like edge AI will actually be impacting the real world the way it doesn't today. And that's going to transform our lives. I mean, just think about cars. We've always dreamed of cars that could drive in unison to avoid traffic. Well, edge AI can enable that sort of thing, right? So like there's anomaly detection that can automatically order maintenance service in factories before bearings break down or before parts, you know, fail. Like this future is rapidly approaching, and Palantir has worked backwards from this future, starting, you know, 10 years ago, figuring out what tools and what products are going to be required in order to operate in that future, and also what philosophies and management structures are required to make sure that technology isn't misused. Because if we look today, companies like Google and Facebook have done a phenomenal job monetizing personal data. The social consequences be damned. You know, I think that Palantir is also the right company from a philosophical managerial perspective to not allow the power of edge AI to be misused in the same way social media and, you know, ad serving technology has been misused today. That they're the right company to do it, specifically because they've worked backwards from this problem, both from a technical perspective and from a kind of philosophical perspective, and they did it a long time ago, and they're way out ahead, you know, in that sense. So that's why I'm like super pumped on them.
So I want to talk about Google, Facebook, and some of the core technology companies that you talked about. Palantir, I don't know if you saw it, but Alex Karp just released his shareholder letter and explicitly threw some digs at these guys. So we can talk about that a little bit. But I want to retrace
I'm
back
not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it was a phenomenal letter in my opinion. I want to retrace back to edge AI. So when I said, why do you think Palantir changes the world? You said, well, artificial intelligence is going to change the world. And edge AI is this level of artificial intelligence that is going to be different than just asking Siri for something,
exactly,
or a recommendation engine like YouTube or Spotify. So can you kind of break down what is edge AI and why does Palantir have the edge when it comes to edge AI?
So like, let's just take it from a technical perspective first, which is in traditional ML AI based software, we put all these models in data centers, like on servers, basically. And when you want to ask a question of the model, your phone or device will go out and it will like try and get an inference from the model, passing it some input data, and you get back out an inference, right? And typically in those scenarios, the model is disconnected from any kind of system in which that change would actually happen. So you're getting a prediction from a model. You as the human operator then will take that information and you'll do something with it, right? But that's a really slow feedback loop if you think about it. One, the performance of just sending the data out to this data set somewhere, waiting for the model to send back a response, naturally introduces a certain amount of latency in that loop. And that's problematic because if you actually want to take action based on a model, often the window of time in order in which you have to take action is now limited. It's useless in a lot of ways. So you want a faster feedback loop in order to take action quicker. Now, to do that, you got to put the models closer to where the data is being generated, right? So you got to push those models out to the devices that are actually providing the input data, whether that's a sensor in a factory or your phone or some sensor in a car or something attached to a wind turbine. And that way, that feedback loop is now shortened into this almost instantaneous loop. But now you're speeding up, you're running past the human operator in a lot of cases, right? So like that feedback loop is now super fast, but is also so fast that you probably eliminated a human's ability to participate in it. And in a lot of cases, you want to remove the human in the loop and have them just monitor that system generally without each inference needing to go through a human operator to figure out what to do. You want to allow autonomy by the machine to figure out what to do. Edge AI, you know, that feature is unavoidable though. I mean, the train has left the station. That's all going to happen. And it's all happening. It's just that Palantir has built a platform that keeps human operators in a loop. And that was specifically designed as part of their work in the DARPA project to make sure human operators could review these decisions and make sure that they agree with machines, you know, and having the benefit of 10 years of being able to do that kind of focus group research, I think is super valuable. So edge AI is this deployment of models out to the devices where the data is generated, and it making autonomous decisions based on that data.
Right. That's the TLDR. The way I always thought of it is
there you go.
The way I always thought of it is in conjunction with IoT devices, right? So like when they talk about their Meta Constellation projects or the stuff they're doing with Wejo with connected vehicle data, it's like these sensors that don't have time to go connect to 5G and then give you results. They have to be operating at the edge to be able to give actionable insights immediately. In terms of edge AI and the market,
but you get my point there though, that like even if you distribute it out to all those sensors, you're losing valuable decision-making time if every decision has to be reviewed, you know?
Right.
So whether or not to reorder maintenance because a sensor is detecting part failure doesn't need a human to make that decision if you have high confidence in the model, you know? And so what does that world look like?
And that's where you need machine learning for those models to be trained to actually be able to give those decisions.
Yes, exactly. And machine learning, and particularly in this field called anomaly detection, there's a whole branch of machine learning that deals with anomaly detection, provides us way better statistical analysis than we could have done otherwise. And so there's some really good articles out there on anomaly detection, but I have a feeling Palantir has heavily leveraged anomaly detection in the field of machine learning to be able to do all these various things, from fraud detection to improving operations on oil rigs to there's a whole category of industrial problems that kind of line up with anomaly detection. So like, but the point is like you have to also consider the world in which machines are autonomous and what does that look like and how do we have confidence in that system. That's a hard problem. That's not a simple problem. Anyone can produce a model. Not anyone can operationalize it in a way in which you can have trust and safety. And I think Palantir is one of the only companies that's considered that problem at scale and actually implemented it, like in the harshest environments ever. Like they implemented that system on battlefields, you know, like it's not, so they have practical experience in this space.
And is the reason they implemented and operationalized an autonomous model at scale that could actually reveal good results because of the technology they have, because of the data they have? Like, why are they able to do that per se? Because it's such a hard problem? Or what gives them that competitive advantage to be able to do
that? It's both so it's a philosophical and a technology problem. So like there are two competing branches in artificial intelligence. There's AI, right? Our standard, we're going to make robots that can do everything. And then there's also intelligence augmentation, IA. So you have AI and you have IA. And these are old concepts. They go back to like the 50s. But basically with the approach of intelligence augmentation, you take the approach that you will never have a human completely out of the loop, and that artificial intelligence should be incorporated into workflows that make humans better, but don't eliminate the human. All right. Mm-hmm. Whereas like artificial intelligence is like, we want an intelligence that can eliminate humans completely. And Palantir traditionally has taken this approach of intelligence augmentation, where there will always be a human in the loop. And our job is to make those human operators better at their job. And that the right partnership is a joint partnership between humans and artificial intelligence. Right. And so that's a philosophical decision that guides your decision-making, which would be fundamentally different than, say, Google and its approach to artificial intelligence, right? Where they are actively trying to remove the human in the loop. And there are various reasons for that. I think most people in the field realize that like true artificial intelligence is probably a 50-year time horizon. You know, it's like not going to happen today, first of all. So like if you're building systems that believe the artificial intelligence is so good you can remove the operator, you're probably going to get a lot of people killed, because these are long tail problems in which, and by long tail problems, I mean like there are edge cases that your model can't handle that have really bad side effects. And there might not be very many of them, but when there is one, someone gets killed, you know, like that's the kind of problem you have. You can see that with self-driving, for example. And like this idea that self-driving, we're just going to get to L5 and go from L2 to L5, like, no, you're going to get a shit ton of people killed if you do that. Yeah. It's not, you can't do it, you know? But like people in a rush who want to see artificial intelligence remove the human operator and aren't comfortable enough with, you know, just making the operator better, they might make rushed decisions that have really negative consequences. And so I think Palantir has realized that like true artificial intelligence, the general AI we're looking at maybe is 50 years out. It's not something that's going to materialize right now. They've built up a whole ecosystem around explainable AI and intelligence augmentation. And they've done, you know, 5 to 10 years of focus group research within the DoD with tens of thousands of people participating to figure out how to make that explainable AI with intelligence augmentation work. Because it's hard.
Right.
It's actual, like, it's like, how do you make a smartphone work in sense of the user experience? Well, it took Steve Jobs to figure that out.
Yeah.
like that's actually a hard problem, and no one's really been able to do it better since, you know. And I actually think Palantir on some level is at that level. They have a approach to this that is unique, that makes the human better, and that's not something you can just replicate. You know, it's hard. It's really hard.
That's really interesting when you mention Steve Jobs, because it's like, okay, this device, this thing that has created multi-trillion dollars of opportunities and ultimately became a platform for the world to be able to create on top of it. That took a lot of engineering, and engineering is one thing, but like the philosophy of Jobs, this whole visionary idea that this one little box can be in your phone and transform the entirety of your existence, that took a lot of philosophical behavior to be able to come up with an idea that could do that. So when you're talking about AI and then AI that works with humans, it seems like you're saying Palantir is one of those companies that has done extensive levels of research influenced by their philosophical beliefs to not replace the human, but augment the human, to actually be able to create a system of an ecosystem of AI that makes sense.
And Peter Thiel talked a lot about that in his books and stuff. You know, like Peter Thiel is often mentioned as the person who doesn't really believe in artificial intelligence as a thing that's going to take over human jobs. That really the question is, how do you partner machines with humans? And what are the relationships that need to be in place there to make both of those things good and better? So like there's this deep philosophical underpinning to how they approach this problem. Then there are the technical challenges, right? So which there are many. So like one of the biggest technical challenges with edge AI is like, how do you actually deploy all those models out to all those places and operationalize that in a way you can maintain control? It's like, I mean, we struggle with just deploying out to like 4 targets on AWS, and now we've got 4 million, you know? So like that kind of an order of magnitude increase in the deployment targets can absolutely make most systems we use today to manage this collapse. And so they, a long time ago, came up with an operational system, including Apollo, to be able to both deploy models at scale on the edge and have a command and control center to make sure you know what's going on in all those places, you know?
When you say AI is likely 50 years away, does that mean you think the Robo taxi and the Tesla bot, that is also not going to happen within the next 5 decades? Like, do you think that's just a pipe dream for people to think is going to be real soon?
No, I think that it's a scaled back version. So like, let's take, what's Google's self-driving car, Waymo?
Yeah.
So Waymo is going city by city on their rollout, right? So like they do one city and they move out to another city, and that there was a recent interview where they said that might be the model that gets replicated, you know, to take it nationwide, is we actually go city by city and solve this problem that way. Right? So how do you, but they said in that same article that is not something that would take us 50 years, that is something we could scale, right? But that's not that you have one model that can drive anywhere, like general artificial intelligence that can replicate a human. You have this thing that can continually learn without being specifically trained on the task. That's like, I want to teach a model how to open a door, right? And I train it on one door, but now I've got to train it on every permutation of that door, like every different kind of door handle, every which way the door can swing. And now I've got to train it on every other type of door and every other permutation of that door. Right? Like that's how you teach a machine how to open a door, you know? That's a hard problem. It's not just that it's not going to learn from the previous steps.
I want to switch to decentralization. So traditional financial services and the entirety of the world has always operated through a centralized model where companies come in the middle. They aggregate a lot of attention or resources, whatever it may be. They control the supply and demand of the flow of those attention and resources at the center of what they have created: Facebook, Google, Tesla, or not Tesla, Amazon, etc. As a result of that, it creates a lot of value, but sometimes that value, or most of the time that value, is disproportionate in terms of who the value goes to, likely the stakeholders of people who are at the center of that centralized authority. Why is decentralization, in your opinion, the future for a majority of the things that we see in the world? And how does Palantir actually play a role in the decentralizing of that future?
Let me just take a simple example, which is machine learning by itself, right? So like, we want this future where machines can help us and we can be enabled, and things we do are made better by machines. But the amount of data we have to train them on is actually pretty astronomical. And the models themselves get really, really, really big as this data set grows. And in response to that, there's an approach called federated learning, which then decentralizes the process of training those models across millions of devices, right? That is a decentralized approach to a big data problem that's required for us to reach the scale we want to reach. So part of the reason the future is decentralized is there's no centralized way to scale the problem up, it's just going to break down. So you have to use decentralized approaches to meet the scale of the amount of data and the amount of training that has to be done. So there's that part of it, which is kind of like this foundational layer. The other layer of like decentralization is just that we need more redundancy and durability in the way we deploy applications. So we don't want to go down when Amazon goes down. We don't want to go down when GCP goes down. We want to be up all the time. And so this problem of redundancy and durability, high availability, the way you solve that is through decentralization. And there are emerging platforms and architectures to solve this problem where you can have active stacks where if I deploy out on AWS and I deploy out on GCP and I deploy on Cloudflare at the edge, I can have all those stacks interacting in a common state of an application. And that's a new kind of way of working. But that's going to solve this durability and reliability problem. And why is that important? Because we may be at war, the world may be more destabilized, networks may become unstable, right? We take for granted today how stable things are. So I think that a big part of decentralization will also just be a shock to the stability, right? And so that's a big portion of why I want to decentralize. And the other has to do specifically with centralized authorities like identity management, Facebook and Google being major players in the identity sphere, where most of the federated login that we do and federated identity management is done by you signing in with Google or you signing in with Facebook. That is a fundamentally a flawed business model, in my opinion, and that regulation will come about that prevents you from storing that kind of information in the future. And to make that work, you need things like FIDO-Auth, which is backed by Microsoft and several other companies, where you use your mobile device combined with biometrics to do sort of passwordless logins. And that technology is here now and is being implemented, rolled out, and a lot of apps used today. But I think that's really the future of identity, is that FIDO authorization model where you are the holder of your own data and you specify the terms in which that data gets used and shared. So there's all of those things kind of working together right now that are pushing towards decentralization.
So I want to push back a little bit on this question of centralized authorities and this argument you're making about logins. So I want to give a little example. If I log in on YouTube with Google, so first of all, what is YouTube? YouTube is a centralized database of the world's videos in one place, in which anyone has the freedom, theoretically, to upload a video and have that video gain them attention and an audience. If I log in with Google, then Google knows that Amit is logged in on YouTube and Amit is searching for Palantir content. And as a result of Amit searching for Palantir content, and we know that he's searching for Palantir content, we're going to show him a video by this guy named CODESTRAP that put Palantir in his title. And we are going to create that connection via very advanced AI and machine learning to make Amit actually care about who CODESTRAP is. And that level of content discovery is going to give a lot of benefits to CODESTRAP because he gets my attention, and to me because I'm going to get the value of the content. And then underlying that foundational transaction is a business model around advertising. Now, what you're saying is there is a world in which that gets regulated out of existence, given governments don't want these entities to have all this attention. And my pushback, and I want to get your perspective on it from someone who's technical, is how does that freedom of discovery of content, which I think we all think is a net good for society, going to happen if there's not a centralized authority at scale that's able to aggregate content and then control the supply and demand of attention through algorithms?
Okay, so let me just say one thing there, that you don't need the data in a form that can be used by a central authority to push content to you. I can build a decentralized version of that exact same system where the content is pulled in by me, right? So like, and this is all enabled by Edge AI. So right now, the models all live on Google servers, and you need to pass data to the models, right, in order to find the thing. Now imagine the model lives on your phone, and you've trained it on your profile, right? You started with a base model, it's trained on your profile, And that never leaves your phone. Now, instead of pushing the data to Google, Google pushes the data to you. You get the exact same experience, but it's been decentralized. And your personal information and your model has never left your phone.
So Google would still be able
sense?
to recommend us videos as a result of, and how would Google still be able to recommend us videos? Like it learns more about us without having our actual data?
It's pushing you content streams as opposed to you pushing it data streams. And your model on your device is going to decide what you want to watch.
So I guess the question then becomes, Google would have, like, I guess, is that efficient for Google to push a ton of content in the model? I mean, I guess I'm assuming
it's pushing a data stream. It's pushing a data stream. I actually built this architecture at where I work. We built a prototype of this on a paper. It's a napkin sketch, basically. But you can build a model that can take global features of your interests and push a continuous content stream of the metadata about that content, and have the model on device find stuff you might be interested in and then present it to you. And that's a small amount of data. It's not a ton of data, okay?
Right.
And you're just using global features to make your selections of things you might be interested in. And all of the deep personal information about what you watch and what you connect with and all of that stays on device. It never leaves your device, okay? So you can still get this recommendation engine that you love and this ability to connect in a decentralized way in which your onboard model is making decisions about the content Google has versus Google making decisions about you based on what data you exchange with it. If that makes sense.
No, that does. So Google would still have YouTube around. YouTube would still push me videos. It just wouldn't know my search results. It would be this edge AI thing that is trained in a decentralized way to be able to figure out the recommendations.
And that's a generalized, decentralized architecture that we're looking at as a way to invert, but a lot of people are experimenting with different architectures. That's just one that I came up with that when we looked at it, it looked viable. And then one of the neat things you can do too is you can combine encryption technologies with machine learning. And they're looking at this heavily in the health insurance space. So there's this technology called homomorphic encryption, which can enable us to encrypt data and make it useless outside of this encryption context. And I could have server-side models that then do machine learning on those models, right? And make recommendations to you. But no exchange of personal data takes place. The data is useless outside the encryption context. And the machine learning models are tuned to work with these encrypted values. And Microsoft Seal is a really good example of that type of a project. They have like a fitness tracker sample application they built using that. And so this is another technology that's coming around that could also enable this ability to not need to track this stuff centrally. But I'm a firm believer that we have enough architectures now to where this is basically viable and that will become sort of the future. And it doesn't even need to be regulated out of existence. I mean, if people are concerned enough about their privacy, which they should be, and they want to control it, there'll be enough adopters of this kind of setup to where I think it will naturally just drive people away from these like centralized content aggregators. There's even models we're experimenting with where user-generated content. So like, wouldn't it be great as a publisher on YouTube if you owned your own content and you could take it with you wherever you went and no one could ever take it away from you or demonetize it? They could only demonetize a channel, right? And it would be nice if you didn't have to jump through like 50,000 hoops to get your videos out everywhere where they could be consumed. There are these decentralized model user-generated content that will you own and distribute your content in an anonymous way to where you just publish it to a registry and you put the terms of the sharing of that content into a blockchain agreement, like a smart contract. And then anyone can consume that content under the terms of that smart contracts agreement, right? So that means these kind of decentralized user-generated content exchanges, they're much further out. They're like 5 years out. But I think they're a better model because it will allow you to monetize your content in the way you want it monetized. And people will have to adhere to it. So there are these really neat models that are coming up. It's a lot like DeFi. Like no one knew what DeFi was or understood it until it came around, and it got adoption. These kind of decentralized ways of doing a centralized thing are going to feel really weird at first. But they are going to deliver value. I promise.
One of the
that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And if advertising is not the primary business model at that point, because I don't think it can be if it's decentralized, then that means cryptocurrencies would have to be the foundational element. And tokenization.
No. Let me correct you there. We also did a proof of concept around a decentralized advertising model that works the exact same way, right? So you set up an ad network, right? Advertisers join the network. They put out their, like, say, movie trailers. They load up movie trailers in this ad network, and they put metadata on top of the movie trailers about what it's about, right? And we'll extract the content from the video and build up a rich profile on those ads. And then when you're a user attempting to use a service, we'll use the same inverted system I was telling you about before, where we open up a data stream of the available ads, and your model on device will determine which ads you're most likely to watch. And then it'll automatically put it into a screen where you can bid on it. So like you'll have like 5 trailers, and maybe like to watch Arcane's trailer is 5 cryptocurrency bucks, but to watch, some other trailer is 15 cryptocurrency bucks. You watch one of them, you automatically get paid in that app's cryptocurrency, which you can then use to pay for services on that platform, right? So like I'm telling you, there's all these other business models that are emerging right now. It's a crazy space to be in.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I didn't even realize that. And I was thinking decentralized advertising would work, but I kind of felt philosophically the whole idea of decentralizing was that you don't have advertisers. That's kind of the ethos of the whole Web3 kind of movement. But I mean, yeah, if there are models to do that, especially if there's an incentive, because you can make money from consuming advertising.
Exactly.
A different model.
Exactly. And so that's why I'm such a fan of decentralization, because I feel like it gives you control, like it hands control back to you in the terms on which you engage in these things. It's you at least have a decision and hopefully get compensated on some level for like your participation. So yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Foundry for crypto? What do you think Palantir's role will be in the crypto markets?
Ooh, this is a good question. Okay. So like one, anomaly detection has a lot of applications in fraud. And so cryptocurrency is like a fraudster's dream right now. It's just like completely blockchain specifically play, or distributed ledgers. We don't even talk blockchain, just a distributed ledger play in a world in which machines are making autonomous decisions. And I actually believe that there's 2 use cases there. One is you need an immutable database to track what happened. Because if there isn't an incident report, like say someone gets killed as a result of a machine made, I want a immutable ledger that can't be changed to know exactly what happened as part of that air log, So there's that application of blockchain. I think Palantir could play a big role in building consortiums on Foundry in which there's an embedded distributed ledger that allows for an audit trail of the decisions that machines made that led up to an incident, right?
Right.
There's also the cryptocurrency space where smart contracts are being used. And this brings in things like Hyperledger Fabric for private blockchain and Ethereum for public blockchain, and Cardano. There's a lot of other public blockchains out there. But I'm most excited about Hyperledger Fabric, mainly because it was made to have a business consortium operating around it, and it has much higher transaction throughputs. And what's cool about that is like you could codify smart contracts when like this machine over here surfaces a signal A, it should execute smart contract B, which then takes some downstream action in this consortium over here. And having that, the reason you want that codified in a smart contract is I want to know you haven't effed with the code in some way, that we have agreed on a business process and you will adhere to that business process. And by using smart contracts, we can all agree on the version of the code you're running and what that code is supposed to do. And so that's another reason I'm excited about where they could play in this space, because they have a partnership with IBM. IBM created Hyperledger Fabric, like these things could actually come out tomorrow, and it would be pretty groundbreaking. And Foundry is made to operate as a consortium.
Right.
It's like Foundry is set up to have multiple people who run Foundry work together in a consortium. So like all it's missing is this like integrated piece with blockchain and machines that are smart enough to do stuff without us being there,
You're saying that Foundry is a DAO, basically.
Right. So it's going to be crazy, dude. Like this is the kind of value I'm talking about also that gets built on top of Foundry, right? So like what does the future look like once developers like me get this in their hands and they start putting this together in the real world? Because Palantir doesn't have to build all that value by itself. Developers could start building it tomorrow. We need to get the tool in our hands,
Well, I think a good segue from that is the fact that I think a day before Palantir releases, hey, we're starting a developer community, I see a video on my feed on YouTube from CODESTRAP saying, why don't we have a developer community yet? And it's like they were listening to you or something. I don't know what was going on. So can you speak to what the true potential is of a developer community in relationship to the growth of the stock as well? Like, what does it mean for the business if there's a thriving developer community?
So it's really like, okay, the best example of like what a thriving developer community can do is if you took iOS. Like I remember when I had a one of those Razr flip phones back in the day, right? And like that was like cutting edge back then, right? And I remember when iOS literally, like I went to a meetup and people from Apple were there talking about this new technology and how it could be applied. they laid out the business plan. Like, here's how the revenue sharing is going to work, and here's the tools you need to build on it. And, you know, fast forward, what is it? I think we're 10 years later or something, or no, 13, maybe 13 or 14 years later.
Yep.
Something like that. And we're talking about trillions of value built on that platform, you know, and Apple didn't build value, developers built that value, you know. So like, if you look, vast majority of value that gets built on a technology, it's always done by developers. You can't have one company just building it all. And so that's an example of like what a developer community can do for you. And not only that, there's high switching costs. So like, if I build my apps for iOS and Android, there's actually a really heavy cost I pay to have to tool up now around a third platform. And like, it makes it harder for other people to enter the market because developers aren't going to want to switch over to that. They're not. It's just the way we operate, because it's really hard to set up an environment and keep it maintained and up to date. And if you try to implement a new technology in a new environment, you're doing so at the expense of this other one you've already built, you know?
Right.
So there's a high switching cost for the developer. They're not going to want to switch. So that's just a barrier to entry for competition. And so there's all of those things. It's the amount of value that developers build on that platform. Plus, there's only so many developers to go around. If you haven't captured them, you're probably not going to get them easily, you know? So I think they're like a valuable resource that needs to be captured early. And that also helps like avoid competition for sure.
So do you see Foundry as like an app store in which developers build actual products on it? And like, how do developers make money off the products they build off the Foundry app store?
So remember I told you there's this future coming, right? With like Edge AI, and like the next generation of applications, Web 4.0, is really like models making decisions in real time.
Right.
But there is no platform that can actually support that. The only one I know of is Foundry and Apollo. Like, that's the only platform that exists today in which you could deploy machine learning at that scale.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. It's like, not only is it a platform, it's the only platform that can do that. So in my opinion. And so yes, of course, it's like, because like, let me give you an example. This is a good example. There's this joke in the industry. We're all inventing how to do ML ops. Like, there's no best practice because it all started in 2018. It's basically 4 years old. And we're all trying to figure out, what is ML ops? How do you do it right? How do you build a software company around machine learning? No one fucking knows. And we don't really know what we're doing. And so it's like, it's not only is it a platform in which you can do this, it's the premier platform in which you can do this. And it will just take all of this chaos that's resulted from us trying to figure out how to do ML ops and build a software company around machine learning and deploy that out to the edge and distill it down into an system in which we can be efficient, you know, and actually deliver value, as opposed to like making mistakes in the operation side.
So piggybacking off of that, I think we understand that Gotham is like this thing for governments. It's like, all right, government uses Gotham, they get more intelligent decisions. Foundry is this thing for businesses, which we've all been conditioned to understand is this modern operating system for the enterprise. What the hell is Apollo?
I love that question, dude. That was epic. So Apollo is like this single pane of glass under which you can manage deploying all of those models you built in Foundry or Gotham to all of the edge locations throughout the world, whether that is satellites or oil rigs or, you know, edge networks like cellular networks or cloud providers or whoever. It's this central system that allows you to manage all of the complexity related to that, monitor what's going on, specify the rules in which these new versions of the model will make their way out to the deployment targets. And it lets you do it in a really fine-grained way. Like what's interesting is like Netflix just published an article about the way they're approaching doing canary deployments to smart TVs. And the canary deployment is just a way in which you send a new version of the software out to a handful of places and monitor how it does before you send it to everyone. Just think of it that way.
Right.
And Netflix just put out an article of all the machinery they're building to power that. Well, Apollo could power that out of the box. Right? So they're way, way ahead of the game with Apollo. Like, it's crazy.
The way I understood Apollo when I was doing research on it is kind of what you said. It's like companies can use it to ship over the air software updates or sort of instantaneously from multiple elements of parts of the company that are working on the software. So you're saying a company like Netflix theoretically doesn't have to build their own machinery for it. They could just use Apollo, and then software updates to smart TVs happen overnight.
And Apollo is completely agnostic as to the software you deploy on it. So that's the other crazy thing about it, is like they use it to deploy Foundry in Gotham, but like you could use it to deploy anything, any model, any software, anywhere. And they came up with this really innovative way using a version of control to decentralize. This is the common theme and everything that we're going to talk about, to decentralize all the logic about deployment from the build system out to all the deployment targets. And that was a really unique insight they had. And as a result, they were able to build a way better system than what we have today, which is crazy.
And to your, to the knowledge that you have, you don't really see other companies building something like an Apollo at scale.
No, I haven't seen it yet. I mean, people could try. I think the challenges they're going to have relate to, so like, I can't talk about what's in Apollo. Let's just say they have like a really unique protocol of how this gets done. And you aren't just going to be able to invent that protocol out of whole cloth, like it would take you a long time to figure out like, what is the best process for doing this kind of a deployment? And again, remember, no one's doing this right now. There's only a handful of companies that even have this problem, although everyone's going to have it soon. And unless you've been doing it for a long time, you wouldn't know how to actually build a protocol that works, right? And deals with all of the issues that have to be resolved when this happens. It's like they have the benefit of baked in experience for 10 years doing it, So it's like, there's also that, which is, so even if someone tried to use the same approach, it would take them forever to figure out the protocol that needs to be baked in there and the concepts that need to be put in there to actually manage this at scale and to deal with the problems that come up. Because there's a whole set of problems that occur as you try to do this. And so, yeah, I think that it would be really hard for another company to come in and kind of emulate what they've done, even if they tried to take the same approach, for sure.
Given they're some of the only ones, as you're mentioning, doing something this hard, creating like a one-of-a-kind type of product like Apollo, is that the reason you believe they have the smartest engineers in the world? And can you kind of talk to like why it's so difficult to get a job at Palantir, even if you graduated from like Harvard and computer science?
Totally. I did talk about this recently as well, but like I always say that like, good engineers aren't hired, they're made. And that generally is like, even if you're graduating from Harvard as a computer science major, it's a great program. I'm sure it's a great program. I don't know. I can't speak to that program, but like, let's take Stanford, because Stanford is one that's well known and like where a lot of recruiting was taking place. But like, even if I got some of the best engineers at Stanford to come out of that program, I still have to train you for at least a year, maybe two, on how to actually build software.
Right.
And the reason is a very different problem when you're trying to work on a single contributor project where you're the only person, maybe two people working on it, versus one where there's 300 and you all have to contribute the same code base. And to do that, you have environment. You also have to have like good documentation and internal training. You have to have good career tracks to keep those people happy. But and a lot of people try to do that, but very few succeed. And Palantir succeeded in that level, not only building the hiring pipelines, but the machinery, the operations machinery that it takes to support hundreds of engineers working on the same code together. And that's in their Git machinery, that's in their online IDE, really, really unique to Palantir. But then on top of that, you have this culture with Palantir where, they will get engineers like into a crisis zone. So like if there is a problem they're trying to solve with their software, they'll actually get the engineers like, pack up your laptop. It's time to go to the crisis zone. You're going, dude. We're bringing you there because the information flow is going to be better and you're going to be able to help affect change faster if you're in that environment. And so they're raising up these engineers who know how to deal with crisis on a level that other engineers never will, with a culture that values the type of decision-making that comes in those high pressure scenarios. And they're going to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in any organization. I mean, you take a forward deployed engineer from Palantir and put them in your own internal organization, you're going to be super impressed with the amount of knowledge and skill these people have at managing a complex operation. So like, and that's just a normal forward deployed engineer. And now imagine an engineer that's been there for 8 years, maybe built Skywise or did something along those lines. Like you're dealing with a whole nother level. Like it's just not even comparable to most organizations, At least that's my opinion.
Now, granted, they get some of the best talent in the world. They pay them well, give them a decent portion of equity. I could imagine if a Google or a Microsoft that has the distribution that Palantir does not in terms of teams and with Microsoft and Google Cloud and just having the access to the customer base that Palantir doesn't have yet, could take one of their engineers or an engineer like that, give them triple what they're making because Google can afford to subsidize that. And that would be a decent monetary incentive if Google or Microsoft was building a product like a Palantir and That engineer was not just working on consumer advertising, because obviously that wouldn't incentivize them. Why can't the big guys do what Palantir is doing? And if they can, do you think there will be a world in which they really do disrupt Palantir's ability to scale as a major technology company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, I've actually said before, like Google's probably their biggest competitor because one, Google's the only company I know of that can operationalize software at this scale and does it, internally. I think that Google has a fundamentally different philosophical approach that would prohibit it from emulating what Palantir is doing. So I don't see them trying to do what Palantir does. I see them disrupting Palantir because maybe they come out with a general AI that can actually replace a marginal worker. Like that would kind of be nuts. And if you combine that with robotics, then you actually have a workforce, like that. You don't need, intelligence augmentation and explainable AI if you have physical AI that can do stuff and can learn and is embodied and it has agency now, So that is a whole different ballgame. And if Google wins at that could put Palantir out of business potentially. But I still think that's like a 50-year time horizon problem if it ever materializes, But Microsoft, I did say this the other day too, I think is a bit of a sleeper here. Their research division, like I subscribe to Microsoft Research on YouTube. They're really deeply embedded with explainable AI. They have huge network effects. So I was saying before, like in another podcast where I was like, you can just pencil them in for 30% of any market they want to get into because their network effects are that big. So like, if they decide they want to compete in the space for real, then yeah, I would take them extremely seriously. But at the same time, I mean, you saw the projections on what this market's going to look like, but at the same time, it's a massive market. So I wouldn't freak out just because like Google or Microsoft enters the market with similar offerings,
And their offerings would be rooted in operating systems for the enterprise, but not necessarily for the government. Because we've kind of seen that they philosophically, they said they don't support the government. So do you kind of see Gotham being the backbone of keeping Palantir alive, even if commercial growth isn't as strong as it needs to be?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the financials to break that down. Like, I think you would need more of a financial expert to say, like, what happens if they lose, 80% of their commercial business right now today? Can the company survive off the government business? I don't know. I know that they're cash flow positive, so maybe losing that revenue wouldn't be that big a deal to them, and that they just continue to grow in the government space. I do know that the approach of explainable AI and intelligence augmentation is the approach that the Department of Defense wants to use as of today.
Right.
That's out in DARPA, right? Like you can read about this and the decision making behind it, but artificial intelligence alone, you have no audit trails. You cannot have a human to actually take responsibility for a decision, and that's kind of a non-starter. There's this other problem that people don't like to talk about, which is the failure rate of ML projects generally, right? And a lot of people don't like to talk about that. And Palantir is kind of the only people, in my opinion. Palantir is the only company, in my opinion, that has like a formula that's proven to work. And I'm not super stressed at some other company, like whether it be Microsoft or Google, coming out with a similar formula that's going to empower customer success rates at the same rate Palantir has. And I think that's just because you have to have organizations that adopt your system and get trained in the way to operate under it. It's not just a technology problem. It's like this whole thing of a human being in the loop. You can't solve it with technology alone, So like, that's just something to keep in mind is like, we can't solve this problem with technology by itself. You actually need to train an organization on how to work and collaborate in a way around the tool that can actually deliver value. And that's a huge problem. That 80%, 87% failure rate is like management wants to ask the wrong questions of the data. We can't operationalize around the data. The data quality is poor. There's all these things that come into play, and none of those go away if you release a tool. They're all there still. Palantir is solving all those challenges as well. So as they bring in customers, they have an ecosystem in which they want you to operate. They have a way they're going to train you. They're going to have a way you can deliver value. And that's actually, you need those things too. So like, even if people enter the market tomorrow, one, I don't think they're going to get their customers interested in the offering. And two, that doesn't mean they have a winning combination. It could just be another bag of hammers in which people club themselves in the face with, So like, there's that.
Right. Because I would imagine if you're an organization that's like, all right, I'm ready to approach the 2030 model of digital optimization. You want the best tool, and you want the tool that's actually going to integrate throughout the very intrinsic fabric of your organization. You're not going to want those hammers or your wrenches. You're going to want an entire ecosystem that you're comfortable paying the money for if you're going to make the investment.
Exactly. You need it, and like I was saying before, like no one's figured out how to really operationalize all this, but they have. And that's why the new certification programs they announced, the training programs, along with the channel partners they're building that are going to do the actual training and certification and consulting services that are now channel partners. Those are all going to be really, really useful to enable, 90% success rates as opposed to 87% failure rates, like.
Now I am a Palantir shareholder, but I also live on the East Coast.
Yep.
And I'm starting to not like the snow because it snowed yesterday and it's really annoying. As a result of that, because I don't like the snow and I'm a Palantir shareholder, I'm also starting to not like snowflakes in general. Again, because I've lived on the East Coast for so long. So should I, because I don't like the snow in real life, also feel threatened as a Palantir shareholder by Snowflake?
I know. That was a good lead-in. Excellent. No, you shouldn't be threatened, specifically because these tools work together. There's a set of things where there's overlapping functionality in Snowflake's Lakehouse and the equivalent in Foundry. So like the Lakehouse is kind of like a center where you can do data governance and do ML and try to get it deployed. And Snowflake's really like a columnar database that has bolted on all these Lakehouse features in recently. And you can't just turn those features on. Like it took Databricks and Palantir a really long time to figure out what are the actors in the system, how should they operate within it, what are the use cases that work and don't. Snowflake can't just come in and emulate something that took 10 years for both of those companies to build and expect it to be as good. It's a good columnar database. It does streaming pretty well. It's got some good features for data governance where you can do sharing without replication. So it has some really cool features, and its cloud model is probably its biggest advantage, which is it's got this hybrid model where it's got a share nothing architecture in the compute layer, and it's got a share everything architecture in the data layer. And that enables rapid customer onboarding. So like they can scale to hundreds of thousands of customers, but in terms of like, it's not one or the other, it's actually both of those things. And like, I actually think the winning combination for Palantir is bring your own lakehouse, whether it's Snowflake or whether it's Databricks or whether it's SageMaker, and we'll do the ML ops for you, right? Because like within Foundry and Apollo, you have a really unique ML ops offering that doesn't exist anywhere else, And so I think that could actually be the killer app, is like actually combining those products with, and what's neat about that is that, think about this, like, that layer, I said there's a lot of overlap between these features. So if you can convince companies to come on board because you have the superior operational side, you can eventually bleed those customers off of that other platform into yours, because you just start enabling more Foundry modules to do more natively within Foundry.
Right.
So it's an interesting entry point from that perspective. So it's like just a way to bleed customers off the platforms, and Foundry's already set up to operate with those tools. So
why wouldn't Snowflake want to build out the ML op instead of let Foundry take advantage of that if they already have Lakehouse set up with their clients? Is it just that it's really hard to do that?
Yeah, because it's just because it's fucking hard. Like operations side, and that's why. And it's all not easy to build a abstraction. For a long time, even Databricks, I think, was AWS only. They've only recently kind of figured out like how to deploy all these artifacts in all cloud providers. But Palantir has like, not only can they deploy all cloud providers and on-prem, they can also do everything like edge networks and phones and everything else in between. So like, their operations offering is really unparalleled, and it's going to be for a really, really long time. And if you're already 10 years out in front in your ability to do this, think of all the features that haven't shipped yet. They haven't finished innovating. They got a long way to go on the innovation side. So I don't think those companies want to compete in those spaces. I think largely Lakehouse's preference, it's really like if I'm a serious scientist, I'm going to use Databricks. That's just the platform. It's the premier for a lot of that stuff. But Foundry's got some really awesome ML capabilities. So It's just that people don't know it as well. Like Databricks has a whole community and training program and certification program. I firmly believe people will eventually get off onto Foundry as they get integrated. And Foundry could replace not only like Databricks as a lakehouse, there's probably 30 or 40 SaaS products I could replace with Foundry, you know? And right now I look at a spreadsheet with our internal company. I think there's like almost 300 SaaS platforms and services we have integrated across our whole organization. It'd be pretty nice to streamline that down to like, 30 or 40 right. as opposed to 300. So like, I think that there's just a lot of operational efficiencies as you put the pieces of the eggshell back together under Foundry, where it's really fragmented right now. Like a lot of people, a good example of that is the operations around security. And now there's like 5 different companies that do anomaly detection from security logs. That's a really good example of something that could be consolidated, So there's a lot of things that are out there as SaaS offerings that Foundry could replace, in my opinion. It's not just, and a lot of them are in these lake houses and a lot of them are in other SaaS products. I mean, I'm not really free to talk about it, but there's just a lot in Foundry,
That actually leads me into my next question that you're not free to talk about it. You've worked with Foundry for builders. They put you under a hell of an NDA. Why are they still operating under this NDA stuff? Is it because they're not ready to fully open source all the information they've got? Or do they actually have something that's so secretive because it's so powerful that they can't have CodeStrap talking about it publicly?
I mean, I can't speak for Palantir because I don't work for them. So like, this is me speculating as to why they're like that. So just, understand I'm not speaking for the company, but like, honestly, I think it's like they work for they work in classified spaces and they have really powerful technology, and they want to make sure that they're not, I'm sure they would probably want to make sure that whatever they release to the public wouldn't be used against those classified, give away something that they don't want to be sharing with the general public. I also think they're probably sensitive to their press and PR, and so they want to control probably the rate of adoption. Rather than just throw it out there, they probably want to control that rate of adoption a little bit, because they haven't exactly, like, they get so much negative press, like they haven't exactly had the easiest time. And I think they really don't want to give fodder to people to create controversy or whatever. So they probably think in terms of both, we have classified customers, we can't be releasing everything all at once. Information security is going to play a big role. That's that joke where I said it's not InfoSec, it's InfoSucks. It's like information security is going to be all over them, whatever they want to release. It's going to have to go through like 50 rounds of review. And so you just have to be patient, I think, is really at the end of the day, it'll be a platform that's worth waiting for, but they can't just like immediately open source it to everyone, just as a result of the way the business evolved.
Speaking of the negative press, I want to talk about this for a little bit. Coming from someone who is intimately worked with the software, just understands the software deeper than any Wall Street analyst could. My question is simple. Are Palantirs the bad guys?
No. Yeah, no, I laughed when I think JG asked me a similar type of question, and I was like, of course it's not. Like, first off, just look at Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, who are like on complete opposite ends of the spectrum politically, regardless of where your politics are. Like, these two completely different people. And then Stephen Cohen, I don't know what his politics are. He seems like a really mild-mannered individual, but they set up this corporate structure so that those potentially won't allow their technology to be misused, allow other companies to come in and just take over what they've built. And I find it really fascinating that you would have a company that would purposefully set up checks and balances for itself, right? Like they're building a system of checks and balances internally to make sure things don't go south, and that they're somehow the bad guys. Like, no, absolutely not. If anyone's the bad guys, it's Google and Facebook. Like, and I have hard data to point to that. I mean, you could look at Jonathan Haidt's research into the effects of social media on young girls. He's got almost irrefutable data that the effects have been insanely bad. And no one's talking about that at Google or Facebook, right? So I in my opinion, they're the good guys. In my opinion, I don't know the underlying politics that people get upset that, government agencies have to go out and do stuff. For me personally, like, I wish I had access to like intelligence briefings so that I could get like a full picture of what's really going on in the world. But I firmly believe that what's really going on in the world, I have a little bit of experience here. Like, both my mom and dad worked for the DoD, and they were in the intelligence space, So I have a little bit more understanding than maybe the average person. But there's some really bad people out there who want to do really bad shit. you know? So like, I wish the world were a better place. I really do. But honestly, if we are going to live in an imperfect world where there are bad actors, I want people like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and Stephen Cohen in charge of life-changing technology. You know, that's fundamentally, hands down. I wouldn't want anyone else in charge of that. That's my opinion. You could vote for whoever you want, but this is the world we live in, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's what Karp talked about in his recent interview. Is just like, look, we don't want this technology to be used in ways in which it can be in wartime or combat, but like that stuff happens. And this Russia-Ukraine stuff, I mean, something probably might not happen, but what if it does? And it's like, if that stuff does happen, are you ready, or do you have to go build out an infrastructure and a tool? And I'd rather be ready than not be ready at that point.
I mean, dude, our enemies don't care what political party you belong to either.
Yeah.
They're going to kill you just the same, dude. Like, they don't care. So like, I think people need to understand that, like, we have, there are people out in this world and countries, whole countries, that are going to be threats. Like what type of sea change would you have? Like Alex Karp talked about, this is a really good thought experiment. Karp said in an interview recently where like, the only reason you have the luxury to criticize us is we stop the terrorist attacks that would have happened from happening, right? Like if the terrorist attacks that we prevented happened, none of you would be complaining about us. You'd be wanting to sacrifice civil liberties to stop future attacks. You know, the lives that prevented a lot of people from just handing over more civil liberties and things devolving further from where they are today. I think people are going to have a different negative about Palantir when it's like real life consequences for them and their families based on the actions of people in foreign governments. So it's like, there are real world consequences to this shit. It's not hypothetical. And I think Palantir gets that more than any other company, like a company that really understands the real world consequences of the space that we're operating in today. And like, we're all going to encounter this future one way or another. You know, it's like, at the end of the day, we're all going to end up reevaluating our assessment, I think, at the end of the day, because this future is coming whether we like it or not, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, like the China example really makes a lot of sense because most of the world's, at least America's supply chains are in China. So if China was be like, nope, we're invading Taiwan, we don't care, we're cutting everything off, like supply chains, logistics, everything would have to change in an instant. And at that point, when real people's lives are affected, when you can't buy the iPhone charger you need because it's not coming from China anymore, then a company like Palantir starts to look a little bit less negative at that point.
Yeah, you're just like, I don't care what you got to do, just implement their software to solve the supply chain crisis. You know, like at that point, it's like, doesn't matter. We've got bigger problems to argue amongst ourselves about how cool Alex Karp or Peter Thiel is. But yeah, no, I'm glad that we have an access to a company like Palantir, you know, for sure. Pretty amazing, actually. Like if the shoe was on the other foot, you know, and it was like China had Palantir, I'd be kind of scared.
Right. No, I would be very scared. I mean, you don't want a dictatorial regime kind of having the power to that. The mission, I want to ask you a question about. Their mission has been very clear, if I have to sum it up, to defend Western values and not work with adversaries who don't defend those values. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all that stuff. Do you think it's hard for me as a general, I would say retail investor or just a general consumer, like Tesla's mission, make the world more cleaner. It's like, all right, anyone can get behind that because it's an obviously bad problem. When you talk about Western freedoms and values, it's a whole political bag of like, it's hard for me to just immediately get that and put my money behind that. Do you think for the retail investing community to grow, because I'm not really talking about institutions here, they will need to get behind the idea of them being the modern operating system for the enterprise and like buy into that mission over the Western stuff? And basically, how do you think the mission is going to evolve when they start to get thousands of customers every quarter?
Let me try and frame this, because I think there's something in there you haven't unpacked yet, which Karp is pointing to. I did read a little bit of the shareholder letter today. I got through the first page and a half or so. You're not going to be able to cleanly separate these things in the future. Okay, so like Tesla's going to make the world cleaner by having edge AI that monitors all of your driving. Okay, like,
right.
What's the potential for misuse if I'm a political actor and I want to destroy you? You know, if I have access to all of your driving data and all of your purchase history and all of your browsing history, I could use AI to do some pretty evil shit to you. You know, there isn't this clean separation of the two things. And that's what I'm pointing out. Like, I think it's what Karp is pointing out. It's like, these things are converging, dude, not getting further apart. And you're not going to be able to separate the political questions from the consumer questions. You already can't to a large degree, you know? So like, how do you solve that problem? I think we need people like Alex Karp and Peter Thiel personally, people who are going to actually point to the fact that have disagreements over what we should do, fundamentally, like what the government's role is maybe, but at least they're going to have the debate and actually show you like, you're missing the point. These things are entangled, not disaggregated. And so that you can't really separate those two things anymore, in my opinion. Do you have even any ounce of privacy left? I don't think so. Now, what happens when the government puts in systems to centralize all of that, and to weaponize it against whoever they want, however they want? That's a really scary future, dude.
And Palantir is one of those companies that through the technology itself is based upon protecting civil liberties. I mean, forget the mission, like the actual tech does not allow civil liberties to be violated, correct?
Yep. And let me just put it to you this way, like what better company to at least have in that space, like imagine the company was like more like Google in that, it didn't matter what you thought. They didn't really have a place for the little guy on the individual level in their agenda, Wasn't there a story that broke just last week about like the CIA collecting data on everyone and using statutory authority that doesn't exist? I think there was a news story that came out about that like 3 days ago.
Yep.
So like the potential for misuse here is just astronomical, and it's a level of, it's so far above anything we've seen before with how good how good these systems are going to be. It's like you can't, I think, wrap your mind around the potential impact and social consequences unless you actually know what could be done with that information. And so in my opinion, I want people who are going to at least value those things and want to ask the question and have a deep philosophical understanding and framework that they've built up for their life around those questions they're going to ask. And it's not going to be about some election cycle or some article that was written. Like they actually have a whole worldview that's informing the questions that they're going to ask. I want those people in that space,
Well, I mean,
that would be terrible without him in that space.
Karp did start off that shareholder letter by saying, or I think it was in part 4, he was like, we have beliefs, we stand by them. And one of the most radical things you can do in the corporate environment is have a belief. Because a lot of these companies, they say they have morals and values, but I mean, it's very selfish and arbitrary. And if it's, Valentine's Day, they'll put up a red thing, right? Like it's all based upon the nature of how people react to it, which is why a lot of companies don't work with the US government, because they get internal disputes. Palantir has made a decisive approach. There are trade-offs to that. But what you're saying is you would rather have that company that actually makes a decision that is not in the middle. It's not black or white or gray. It's like, this is what we're doing, versus a company that doesn't.
I would at least like them to be in that public sphere, like amongst other people who have different views. But if you were to remove that viewpoint, then you might get steamrolled into a future you don't want to live in, know? So to me, I think it's valuable that they're there and that they have a voice. I value that. And like, I happen to personally agree with their approach to ML and AI and sort of their balance between the need to protect civil liberties with the need to provide national security and empower Western institutions. I personally happen to agree with that, but like, I don't want to see a world in which Palantir is somehow marginalized to where they can't participate. Like that would just be catastrophic,
Right.
And so I think people should just really understand, like take seriously their viewpoint, because it's shaped by, 20 years of being in the space, along with a whole lot of hard work before that to think deeply about these problems. They're not just like willy-nilly coming in saying stuff. They've built this up both with the knowledge that you're not allowed to have, right? So like they have a whole set of knowledge and facts that you've never seen before. Okay. That's what intelligence briefings are, and they also have the benefit of thinking deeply about philosophical questions, like Karp being, PhD in philosophy, for example, right? So like, these aren't people who just take these questions lightly, and I'm glad we have that voice there. And I happen to think that, hopefully they shape this future we're moving into in a positive way, knowing that they can't do everything. There's just going to be a lot of chaos injected. There's a lot that's out of our control. We can't stop Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. We can't stop China from invading Taiwan. A lot of this stuff's going to be outside of our control too. So, yeah. And also, I just really want you to understand that, like, the questions you're asking about civil liberties and commercial, those are intertwined today. They're not disentangled. They're incredibly entangled. So it's not like you can separate those things cleanly anymore. So that's the other thing to think about. It's just like, it's not this or this anymore. And that's why they don't try to separate those things, in my opinion. I mean, I can't speak for them, but that's what I think.
Last two questions. AWS and Palantir, you've made some videos about Palantir Cloud. Do you think there's a world in which Palantir goes up against AWS from the cloud computing side, not just the ML AI ops side?
I think that what will emerge is like this, what's the sky compute layer, which is what the CEO of Databricks has sort of called it, which is an abstraction over the cloud infrastructure. And so the reason we need that is because we don't want to be tied to a single cloud provider, you know, and I don't want engineers writing infrastructure as code specific to the control plane of Amazon and spending their days doing that instead of building features, right? So like, and this has emerged in companies like the serverless cloud and Versal, where you can go in and build apps without having to write any infrastructure as code. But you can integrate with things like Shopify and things like Fauna and Datadog, right? So Palantir could build a similar platform for ML at the edge, AI at the edge, and they'll allow you to pick like, what lakehouse do you want to use? You want to use Databricks? Okay, check this box, right? And then like, what cloud providers do you want to deploy on? You could check like AWS, GCP, Azure, you know. What edge networks do you want? You can click, you know, CloudFront or Cloudflare, you know, and then you just hit submit and your infrastructure gets automatically provisioned across all of those resources. That's what we want right now. And it's being materialized in these other companies that are building these sky compute layers. And I think that's the future, because we don't want our engineers dealing with those internal subject matter expert questions related to the control plane of some cloud provider. And I think that's where, if they launch a service like that, it would just crush it, you know, because then like all of the barriers to entry that we have right now of building that ourselves are just completely removed. And we get the benefit of this multi-cloud edge infrastructure with Apollo powering it all out of the box with a credit card.
Right.
That would be crazy, dude. Crazy.
Yeah, because you can sign up to AWS in minutes and get started on your stuff, right? But if Foundry was able to do that times 1,000 and you can sign up in minutes, I mean, you
can get signed up in minutes on AWS and spend the next 3 years writing infrastructure as code to deploy your stack on AWS. It's not that easy.
Right.
So like, what this is doing is it's taking all of the provisioning that you would have had to spend oodles of time and money having your engineers write and abstract it away from you. And they'll write it once and make it sure it's right. And so when you sign up, you're automatically provisioned on those things. You don't have to write 1 ounce of code, you know?
Because it's not specific to an AWS anymore. It's specific to this
exactly.
Guy. Right.
And they have the ability to do that uniquely through Apollo.
Right.
So if they make that happen, then you can scale to millions of customers.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Okay. This has been fun. My last question, you're not a stock guy, finance guy, but you're talking about Palantir and the thriving Palantir investing community, as we talked about at the beginning. So I do want to, I think people would really love to know your interpretation of the potential of the stock price. So my question sort of here is, Tesla in 2018, even 2019, even early 2020, when the pandemic just happened, was probably one of the greatest arbitrages of our lifetime in terms of buying it at 190, May 2019, even 300, March 2020, and then skyrocketing to $5,000 post-split. Do you feel Palantir going from, it was at 29, now it's at 13, you know, whatever the number is, obviously below 20s. Do you feel, based upon the potential and all the stuff we talked about, even if it's a little bit far away, maybe a decade away, this is one of the greatest arbitrages for someone who is actually knowledgeable, who's actually consumed content about Palantir and finally gets it, when in a world in which a lot of the Seeking Alpha articles will never truly get it, to actually own this stock and own this stock proudly through the dips over the next 5-6 years?
So first, let me just say, don't base your financial decisions on the shit that I say, because like, I'm an idiot, dude. Just don't do it. Do your own due diligence. I'm not a financial advisor. For me personally, yeah, like I see 100x potential in the stock, and I think that's further out. I think it's more like 8 to 10 years out where you'll have that kind of hyper scaling. I think that I've said by 2025 or 2026, I see an inflection point coming in, and that's where you could have established a developer community. People know the tool, and you'll get adoption rates that are like in the tens of thousands, you know? So I look to that period of time where they go through some pretty massive scaling, but to get to the hyper scaling 100x potential, yeah, I think that is there. I think it's not the thing that I invest in when I look for stuff like that. Like I know enough being around startups my whole life to look for an operations moat that can produce value forever and continually innovate.
Right.
And that's important because when Amazon was a bookstore, no one thought it was going to be the world's largest infrastructure company, right? Yes.
Yes.
No one thought Google would rival broadcast advertising. I know because I was in the advertising business at the time. Like I worked for a cable, cable channel. And so like no one believed that. And both those companies completely transformed the world. Microsoft reinvented itself like 3-4 times. It's like to have that, you need this culture of innovation that's built around an operations mode that can do engineering at scale, and you need visionaries that join the company. And I don't think it will always be Thiel and Karp, by the way. Like they're not going to work there forever, dude. Like, maybe they're part of the board forever, but like they're eventually going to have to bring in additional people. But in general, I invest in people and operations that I think can continually innovate over time. And that's what's going to deliver that 100x, value. But it's a huge gamble. It is way more likely that thesis is wrong than it is right. So like, just people need to realize, like, yes, everything about what I know tells me that this is going to be 100x return in 8 to 10 years or something. But like, that it's way more likely that it's a 30% return or something. Like, so just understand that there's just a lot of shit that can go wrong, and don't take my word for it. Do your own due diligence. This is a high stakes game. This is like VC style stuff. When you heavily invest in a single stock, you're essentially playing a VC game that a return in any one of those stocks will return the entire value of the fund, and that's a high stakes, high reward game. So, but I think that they have the people and the operations to make it happen for sure.
Got it. All right. That is the CODESTRAP interview. Thank you for your time, CODESTRAP. Leave his YouTube in the description. You guys can check him out. Any last words you would like to say?
No, I think that's it. I would say, if you're an engineer, if you're a financier, if you're in marketing and operations, like the best thing you can do if you believe in a technology is to build value on top of it. It's not just to invest in it or trade it. And so if you really do believe in the company the way I believe it, I would say, look to join the developer community, look to build something on it. Like that's the thing that will deliver the hyperscaling. Find an innovative strategy to take advantage of edge AI and participate in that, that revolution. Like that's what's going to deliver the hyper scaling in the future, in my opinion. So yeah.
All right. That's it. Thank you, CODESTRAP. Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys in the next time. Bye.
Talk to you. Bye.